Hey, Brass Facts here. The Russo-Ukrainian War is one of the most unique wars in recent history, with a relatively ragtag force squaring off against a much more organized force, and as of this video, somewhat successfully holding back the tide. While half of you are already riled up by that statement alone and gearing up to pounce on anything I say next in the comment section, I hate to disappoint, it ain't that type of video, bro. I'm going to be entirely focusing on lessons learned from an individual standpoint, and more importantly, which of those lessons apply to the prepared citizen. You know, the point of this channel. For this endeavor, I interviewed someone who's been boots on the ground in Ukraine from just before the invasion to then about March that year, and then followed up with multiple on and off visits to present day, last time being this summer, mostly in the southeastern region of the country. For his sake, he has requested I keep his identity safe as much as possible due to the repercussions of his specific job being a bit unique in nature and requiring some anonymity. All that I can really say is that he was involved with the territorial or volunteer force, more so than the conventional army. A thing to note in this video, there'll be a recurring theme, each region, each unit, each individual does things vastly differently. There is no unified doctrinal way that is agreed upon theater-wide, and even if there was, no one could actually implement it. So in a discussion of individual soldier kit and, rifle, we get a bit of a free-for-all Build-A-Bear type scenario when it comes to gear loadouts and such. In the future, I might consider perhaps a logistics, survival skills, or even a tactical video, if we can get someone on like Valve Gear. Great channel, by the way. But this video, we will almost certainly be pedantically focusing on individual firearms-related kit, and lessons learned that may apply to us, as well as certain lessons that almost certainly do not apply to us. It goes without saying, I haven't done cool guy shit. I'm just a civilian, very comfortably from my home, making commentary on war. So take everything you hear with this video with a grain of salt. Been working on the script all day, made an old-fashioned. Let's do it. Starting out, the opening hours of the war were pretty bleak. Show up to a deployment area, get handed an SKS, some loose ammo, and a VHS tape with enemy at the gate. One gets the rifle, the other one follows him. That was a terrible accent. While the last part may or may not be unconfirmed, I'm sure many are thinking exactly that scene when handed an ancient rifle with a bunch of loose ammo. Fortunately, unlike the movie, that quickly got rectified. The old Soviet, now Ukrainian armories are pretty big in size and scale, and soon enough everyone had their standard issue AK-74, 4 mags, and 240 rounds of ball ammunition, as well as a little cozy bandolier for your magazines. In this time period, equipment currency was excess ammunition for training and magazines, where as much as you can get being the general manta when confronted with how much, and the Russians being the answer for where you got it. A result of both sides using roughly the same equipment, the Soviet Union and its consequences. Magazine-wise, the current trend seems to mirror what we're seeing here in the West. Overall, smaller load-bearing kits compared to, say, 20 years ago, with sometimes as few as 3 mags on body. But, this is critical, everyone is carrying 5, 10 mags elsewhere, like their backpack or something like that. While magazines for us are a $10 affair and a 5-minute trip down to your local whatever store, here in Ukraine magazines are very valuable as mentioned, so dump pouches are almost certainly a mandatory requirement. You gotta keep your mags, and especially the mags that you know work. Armor was also a similar affair, with most receiving what my subjects thinks is a Corsair armored vest, but was usually just dubbed the anti-bullet jacket. Oh, very descriptive. Functionally not too dissimilar in concept to something like a US IOTV armor, where it has both hard armor and prolific use of soft armor, all interconnected for comprehensive coverage. A joke backed by an air of seriousness that only the potential annihilation of your nation give. The limited groin protectors early on were prioritized to those without kids on sentry duty, because my balls. Similarly, ballistic helmets too, and are still incredibly ubiquitous. Everyone's got one. The general trend here is understanding that most of the threats, or most of the casualties in this war, are caused by artillery, the vast majority of them. So armor, as a result, is incredibly ubiquitous. Once the war would look like it was going to last for more than 4 minutes, is where things get interesting, I think, from a learning perspective, and where we'll focus on. There is seemingly a universal trend of ditching your issued gear, mostly always armor, but sometimes even the rifle, depending on your unit and, more importantly, funding level. Basically, if you watch combat footage and a dude is wearing something that isn't the aforementioned vest or stock AK-74, it probably came through a regular means compared to what we're used to here in the West. It's important to have some probably redundant interjections here. The way gear acquired varies wildly. with SOF and regular army units having a bit of an easier time with funds often be augmented by the unit or government, with some of them being outright given higher end gear, while territorial defense forces being pretty SOL, running basic issued equipment almost as a rule, with non-standard gear acquisition relying entirely on personal funds. When you look at, these screenshots I'm showing you, or you look at any footage, remember the whole thing with Ukraine is that everyone is desperately Hunger Games styling it, trying to secure more funds. So the richer units sort of have a self-fulfilling prophecy where they're doing all the cool missions, they get all the combat footage, they put it on the internet, it gets popular, and thus they secure more funds. But the large takeaway here is basically everyone is spending a significant amount of personal funds to get gear they want and, need. If you're still confused, think of Brad from Generation Kill, Amazon ordering armor platings for his Humvee. Think that, except there's no Amazon here. If you haven't watched Generation Kill, please unsubscribe. Regardless, in short order, we're beginning to see everything from high-end gear that most would consider, Gucci gear, Cry JPCs, AVSs, BFG, LV119s, you name it, but also seemingly just as prolific knockoff versions of this gear, or even straight-up airsoft gear. Everyone wants literally anything other than the standard issue flak armor vest. Outside of certain maritime units, or very specific high-speed recce boys, no one is using chest rigs without armor as far as my interviewee can tell. Interestingly enough, due to his experience in other theaters, not Ukraine, he's seen the exact inverse to be true. I suspect it's a multifaceted mission drives the gear dynamic, where the Ukrainian theater is a significantly shorter range traveled, it's a colder climate with decent resupply and a high artillery threat, versus, say, the stifling hills of Afghanistan or the jungles of Asia, where you might need to travel almost triple-digit miles and you need to carry all your supplies on you. Also, hilariously, depending on where you go, still outside of Ukraine, you might get called a pussy if you wore armor. Yeah, more common than you think. In Ukraine, everyone is operating on a bit more secular assumptions about bullets and their consequences upon impacting the human body. People also tend to be less okay with dying here. My guy makes a big point to note that armor and plate carrier acquisition is not all logical. Some of it is simply that a lot of people view the issued gear as uncool and do a lot to try to get out of it ASAP. Anyway, without a doubt though, it seems Western-style modern tactical gear is very desirable here, likely due to the ergonomics, quality, and technological edge that you're gaining from being able to use modern armor over the Soviet stuff or even older NATO-style stuff from the Cold War. We sort of see that trend fall over to firearms. While most are still using the issued 74 in stock configuration, those that can afford to are jumping ship to other weapons, or at least procuring modern variants of the 74 with railed systems, Picatinny rail attachments, and the entire Zenico catalog. Lots of Bren 2s, 416s, saw some Scars, tons of M4s, or even civilian AR-15s, with a particular interesting instance of a dude with a Springfield Saint with the rubber red factory band still around it. Amazing. Yeah, no, defense rifles, at least within my subject circles, was somewhat viewed as a grail or status symbol rifle, right? I mean, it's a good rifle, it's going to do rifle things, but also there was a bit of prestige attached to it. I swear to God, if they start importing these, I'm going to do something that puts me on national news if a DD with a VFG in the default position with a sight mark becomes clone-correct Ukrainian builds to imitate. Now, this isn't a case of the US arms room style concept. There aren't massive warehouses full of just different rifles and you can go in and pick and choose what you want Battlefield 4 style for your particular mission. Most of these rifles are bought through normal or gray market means. There is some team and unit input pushing towards standardizing the ammunition type or magazine type, but overall it's a bit chaotic. You've heard of pull logistics, you've heard of push logistics. Welcome to IKEA catalog logistics. Okay, not really, but it's a good joke, okay? An interesting sidebar is the relative lack of 7.62x39 AKs. Now, they're there, you see them occasionally, but they're pretty rare, especially if your worldview of Ukraine is Lord of War and Tarkov. While certain scenarios seem to even favor the round, specifically urban dismount operations for barrier performance, overall those that don't have a choice get given a stock 74, and those that can afford to get given a different rifle tend to not pick the AK, in 7.62. The result is that any AK pattern rifle in circulation tend to just kind of get shuttled towards rear echelon formations, as far as I can tell, often comprised of older folk, or sought out by those that prefer the rifle, typically due to their Cold War training, creating a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy where 7.62 AKs are boomer guns. Get fucked, AK gang. This crowd is also the same crowd that are carrying their old swords and are often the only ones still using bayonets. So really, in the grand scheme of things, super cool. Keeping that dream alive. Anyways, where were we? Oh, right. Equipment in Ukraine. I think the statement that small arms have never won a war is, partially true still. The basic iron sight AK-74 is doing work over there, obviously. But I think it's quite telling that historically Russian SF units trend towards Western equipment and AR-15izing their AKs, and the same seems to be playing out in Ukraine formations at a higher degree than we'd expect for a conflict with a pretty low per-soldier kit budget. It seems Western weapons offer enough of an ergonomic advantage that it's worth spending precious personal funds and hassle to acquire a tactical rifle and its magazines. It really does point to how good we have it in the US, where AKs have become boutique, hipster, expensive weapons for those with way too much money and time on their hand, and AR-15s are things that virtually grow on trees. One thing that becomes notably apparent is the lack of shorter-barreled weapons, so no Mark 18s, only a couple crinks here or there, and no PCCs for sure, outside of rear echelon or artillery-style troops. While one can presume it's because they're ballistically inferior and thus shunned in favor of carbines, the Occam's explanation is probably that outside the crinks, these weapons are actually pretty rare, and stuff flowing into the country is going to be military infantry pattern rifles. Also, without suppressors, which are rare, they're kinda horrible to use. I can't show the footage because I don't want my channel to get absolutely annihilated. I was watching a dude with a short-barreled either AK-74 or 7.62 one shooting in the trench, and that thing is fireballing and kicking up sand everywhere. It looks horrific. Now, because the AK-74 is very abundant, but also a relative pain in the ass to mount optics that aren't designed for it, I find a good chunk of weapons are still rocking irons, specifically the 74s, but as the war drags on, we're beginning to see a veritable flood of aim points, EOTech's Holson Trijicon. Sounds like a song. And of course the ubiquitous default video game red dot sight, the Ultra Dot Pan AV, or more likely a rip-off one from Alibaba. You're watching this channel, you know the deal. Optics makes aiming your rifle easier, faster, easier to use in varied lighting conditions, and you can see more stuff, assuming it's magnified, right? We're seeing a lot of magnifiers over there as well. I think it's pretty tempting to see your favorite optic in Ukraine and then scream battle-proven from the rooftops, but remember, optics are expensive, optics are hard to get. People are going to end up buying whatever they can get, some of which includes fucking terrible optics, like this BSA that almost certainly lost zero before we even put it on the gun. A fun sidebar, the Mepro dual power. The interviewee seemed to make a pretty big point about those being hot fucking garbage, with several of them getting completely trounced by even basic recoil and full auto weapons. My best friend has one. I'm gonna go make fun of him now. Unlike red dots, which encompass an entire smorgasbord of the civilian offerings, the majority of magnified systems I'm seeing there are generally just ACOGs or LCANs, issued stuff, usually attached to M4s they were probably imported with. Or in another case, the mini ACOG, which was probably tactically acquired off of the NLAW. I've really only seen like a handful of LPVOs and virtually zero sniper or rifle style scopes, so 2-10s, 4-16s, 3-18s, whatever. A big factor for this, no doubt, is everything is more expensive, so when a Holson is a big ask, a magnified optic may just be a bridge too far. But if you spend any time watching Ukraine combat footage, it tends to be a lot of suppressing fire, followed by closing with the enemy at sub 100 yards and closer. And the precision aspect offered by a LPVO is probably not worth it in a lot of cases, especially since they do absolutely come with some downsides. This is something us Americans probably need to remember from time to time. We love maxing out our weapons capabilities and a desire to do it all, but a fundamental lesson from war time again, conflict tends to be up close and personal. 20-second sling sidebar. Slings are insanely prolific, basically mandatory. You just need to look at one or two moments where the dudes clearly aren't running rifle slings and set their rifle down in the mud, pick it up again, and the whole thing looks like a diarrhea sandwich. And despite what Dugan Ashley says, most rifles will not survive a ham sandwich, or in this case, mud and dirt in the action and magazines. Valgear did a cool video. Sorry to keep simping that channel, but I'm an absolute sucker for real-world anecdotes when reviewing guns. Makes my channel feel amateurish by comparison. But he found, I believe it was his Bren who reviewed, that it kind of choked in these environments. And a sling, from what I can gather, would do a lot to mitigate the amount of dirt in your rifle. Combined with a lot of, anti-tank weapons used and utility items used like thermals, it's nice not to have to set your weapon down every time you use it at a minimum. Anyways, the AK-74 kit comes with a sling, so at worst case scenario, you're just going to harvest it off of that and use a sling in theater. Weapon-mounted lights, WMLs. Pretty rare. I haven't seen too many over there, and my dude mentioned something similar to that vein. I think a lot of it has to do with CR123s are kind of expensive and rare in Ukraine, so a lot of the military-style weapon lights, Surefire M600 patterns, are sort of a pain in the ass. So when we do see weapon lights, a lot of times, brace yourself, O-lights are viewed as both convenient and cheap, being able to be topped off by a battery bank, which they can charge at base or via solar panels in field, versus, the CR123 lights, which require a very expensive and lengthy process to source CR123 batteries, typically from Poland. If I had to guess, lights here are primarily used to peek into shadows, be it the back of a trench bunker, in the trenches, at a window outside in during the day, at the end of corridors, basically any poorly lit area during day or dusk type settings where your adjusted eyes might have trouble seeing into that shadow. Which makes sense, but once again, comment section could probably chime in here. From our perspective, I would be careful about going down the route of maxing out your credit card on O-lights the next time they flood all of your favorite YouTube channels with sponsorship deals, but the sustainment aspect of batteries is a lesson we could absolutely learn. Fortunately, we have prolific access to lights that use 18650s, and if you're picky, you can get stuff like the Surefire 18650s, which have USB micro charging ports on the side, solving the in-field charging problem. Throw in a mini battery bank, maybe a backpack solar panel, and you can keep your Gucci little light going for about 20 years until the battery and solar panel begins to degrade. For stuff that only can use CR123s, don't ditch it. We still exist in the holy land of Jeffrey Bezos, the Slurp Lord himself. You can, for maybe $50, $100, get a literal lifetime supply of CR123s 2-day shipped to your door. If you haven't done that yet, now's the time. What I do is every time I empty a box of CR123s, I buy 2 boxes to replace it. Next up, suppressors. They're almost viewed as mandatory in SOCOM circles and many prepared citizens alike for both sound and signature reduction. Most Ukrainians don't have access to good electronic ear pro, and thus are speed running permanent hearing loss. Anything to take the edge off is obviously desired, but like with everything else, it costs a lot of money, and especially here, the standard issue rifle tends to not like suppressors without just immediately mangling them, as Soviet-era 74s tend to have awful thread concentricity. So you tend to see a lot more suppressors on M4 style weapons or NATO style weapons, and the suppressors you do see on the 74s tend to look like they came out of a machine shop. Literally. I've heard some interesting anecdotes as well that cans are kind of a pain in the ass due to the typical higher than average round counts being, dumped, meaning a lot of them are going to be nuclear hot while seriously fouling up the firearm, and those machine shop suppressors I just mentioned tend to explode a little bit, or at least have massive failures and baffle strikes. In a theater where signal reduction might matter a little bit less since a lot of people are using thermals and you're a more static environment. But we are, as far as I can tell, seeing more suppressors, on firearms. Anyway, we're starting to see a theme here. Basically, everything that we want in the land of red, white, and blue, they want even more. Night vision falls in a similar camp here to an extreme degree. Everyone wants it, no one has it. Not just because of cost, but I imagine also the multifaceted nature of night vision. For night vision to be used in a fighting role, you require a unique tree of complementary equipment, rare, expensive, and typically requires augmented training. You need a helmet with a shroud, a mount, an arm to mount to that mount, and to the night vision, and then a laser aiming device. Complexity, cost, combined with the relative unintuitive nature of night vision, and the lack of training, and the compromising effects of night vision if you don't know what you're doing with, say, a laser aiming module, means most units aren't fielding night vision in the traditional sense. Instead, they're using maybe 1 to 2 devices, more so for sentry and observation duties, and less so equipping the entire unit with nods and then doing hood rat shit raids at night. Comprehensive offensive usage of night vision, how we imagine in the US, are mostly limited to the high-end shock units or SOF, where without question, I believe they're being used to great effect. Whatever, this was outside the purview of my interviewee, so I'll move on. I'll just say, I think the utility it provides to the prepared US citizen, the ability to move effectively in the dark, mostly undetected from location A to B, is still a super useful tool to have. It's also way cheaper here to buy, relatively, which is depressing because it's still expensive as hell. The takeaway is because most units cannot afford to equip and train troops with night vision, and thus relegate it to observation device, thermals really kind of kicks night vision out of the way as the more relevant tool here, and really probably one of those single most coveted pieces of equipment in Ukraine right now, right next to cigarettes. For Ukraine especially, which is falling into a trend of long periods of static followed by short bursts of, offensive operations, The ability to scan an area where you roughly know the enemy should be when your sentry has his spidey senses tingle is an irreplaceable component of security. And the knowledge that used to require multi-million-dollar ISR assets are now in your pocket. About to assault a position? Give it a glassing with your thermals. That building looking awfully like a sniper's paradise? Glass it with your thermals. Your friend is pissing off in the corner, so you do the thing that all dudes do, glass it with your thermals. Most commercial thermals are also pretty simple to use nowadays, requiring minimal training once you figure out the UI spaghetti mess that most menu systems are. I think thermals are finally coming around to the point where their capability to price ratio is becoming more realistic for normal people to acquire, which remember, most people in Ukraine are buying their own gear. And without question, I think we'll quickly find that if anything does come out of Ukraine that isn't already being implemented, it's that thermals may become standard issue kit. And it's not just the tool itself. Thermals, in conjunction with a lot of other things, offer unparalleled situational awareness compared to where we were even 15 years ago. Drones and thermals have fundamentally changed the way soldiers have to move around on the battlefield. The assumption that you are unseen when concealed is becoming increasingly less true, and thus SOPs and doctrines change the match. Just be careful not to view thermals as this win button, because in reality, that's not how they work. You can counteract or mitigate thermals, including simply range, ambient temperature, and the fact that most thermals kind of suck, right? You gotta spend a lot of money to get pretty good thermals. Regardless, hell yeah, thermals, neat, cool. As we go through this, a recurring theme seems to be that this war is about maximizing limited funds and prioritization of gear, and not necessarily, going after all the good stuff. For the Ukrainian basic infantryman, while he can choose to spend money on the sexy stuff, night vision, lasers, optics, and more, that money seems to go first towards, anecdotally at least, towards soldier kit items like backpacks, high quality cold and wet weather gear, better armor, armor carriers, and superior IFAKs and more, with added creature comforts, obviously, like cigarettes and better food. I don't think I need to point out the striking parallels with US consumerisms, and the fact that we too are kind of in a battle of maximizing funds, and we might be picking the wrong choice when we over-prioritize certain gear and over others, and maybe, looking at you with 17 different configured rifles. Interesting or useful to look at an ongoing conflict where we get hints on what is prioritized in a fun-limited environment, where these decisions may literally be life or death. Let's close out this video since it's probably dragging on a little bit, and I think most of the conclusions given throughout the video kind of speak for itself, so I kind of want to offer a counterpoint before I send you off. Be careful about taking everything that comes out of Ukraine as gospel. The same way we took everything from the GWAT as the holy word, and then, later down the line, realize, oh boy, not all of this is actually applicable to us stateside as citizens. Ukraine is facing a unique set of challenges, the same way our boys over at the GWAT have faced a unique set of challenges, in the same way that you or I, God forbid, anything would happen in the United States, would face a unique set of challenges. Ukraine is very much shaping to be a war of logistics. For you, for me, I suspect traditional logistics won't make nearly as much sense, and what you've bought and owned and trained with beforehand is going to be one of the dominating factors. I also think our challenges are going to be based around sustainment and making do with less. Maybe. Who knows? Wow, that was esoteric and unbearable as fuck. Alright, let's call the video here. This small bit here at the end because I don't really know where else to say it, or honestly how to say it, so forgive me. I just made this video on lessons learned on a conflict half a world away, as if it's just this thing we can observe from afar, and afterwards I'm gonna go drink some beer and play Lethal Company because I have the luxury to go do exactly that. But this war isn't just this thing that we see off in the distance on TV, it goes on for both sides. I know a lot of people have very strong opinions about this war, not gonna get into that. I just want to offer a moment for those who have lost their lives in this war, lost friends, and those that are still struggling in it. Thanks for watching, and thanks for the dude that helped make this video. You know who you are. For this video, especially in the comment section, for anyone that has currently or is fighting, please chime in. I'd love to hear your thoughts and be told that I got literally everything wrong here. And perhaps, if this video does well, it might be fun to hunt down someone that has a more intense style unit and share their thoughts for me in part 2. Alright, that's it. Bye, Felicia. This is the only way she'll eat right now. If I hold it for her. You're actually eating it. Look at that. Good Lord, Nova. Okay, you were hungry. Don't forget to breathe. I think that's it. I think you got it all. All right, back in the tent. Come here. Here. Nova, in the tent. In the tent. Go lie down.